Edna, it's a huge honour to be here interviewing you today. The response to your reading last night with Colm Tóibín was quite exceptional. You received a standing ovation from the audience. And of course it's a huge honour for any author to be shortlisted for the Frank O'Connor Award. But I wondered what it meant to you as an Irish author to be shortlisted for such a prestigious prize that is based here in Ireland.
Well, it actually meant a lot to me. First of all, I haven't been shortlisted much for prizes. And secondly, it's my own province, Munster. I'm not from Cork, but I'm from Clare, which is in Munster. And when I started out to write, with The Country Girls and the books that came after, I certainly wouldn't have received a standing ovation. Whatever the opposite to a standing ovation is.
I can't imagine that.
No, they were very cross and angry and the books were banned, but there were also people personally were furious with me. So that it's like coming full circle. But it did mean a lot because I write about Ireland, I write about themes that, and some that are very close to people, some of them in fact rather awkward almost for people in that they would maybe rather that certain themes were not explored. That used to be the case. So to be welcomed as I was and shortlisted for the prize, it meant a huge thing privately to me and publicly. But privately I thought, well, yeah, at last.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And actually that brings me on to my next question, because I wanted to ask you, you've written, I believe, around 15 novels that are considered State of the Nation novels. As you say, you've written about this very theme very important to Ireland. What is it that keeps bringing you back to the short story? And do you feel there are different themes that are more appropriate to the short story?
Maybe, but maybe not so much different themes, although I'm about to now contradict myself, which of course is not unusual. It's that certain material, to maintain the momentum of it and the dynamic, is at most 10 or 12,000 words, like a long short story, or even a short story. So that was, with, say, Shovel Kings, the first story in the collection. I had always wanted to write about the Irish, the young men who came and dug the streets of London to put down the cable, and were mostly failures. They didn't all become millionaires. And I interviewed a lot of them, mainly in pubs, I have to say, in North London and so on, Camden Town.
When was this?
Just lately, I mean, well, 2 years ago, I forget the date. And they were older and, sadder in a way. But they all had great stories. Now, if I were to stretch that, even though, as I say, I got lots of stories from people, it wouldn't have withstood it. As you know, and you write both as well, the dynamic of a short story is both very interesting to read and hopefully fairly interesting to write. It's not that it's any easier. The only thing that's easier is the length. So a 15,000 word story, in that sense, you can make it tighter and select. In fact, many novels I read, and I wish they were just short stories, because they err on the side. Virginia Woolf made a very cogent remark once. She said in her novels, it was the problem of getting her characters from lunch to dinner. But in my books, they don't usually eat either. But I find the short story to read as well. For instance, let's take two great authors. I mean, Chekhov for me is the god. He's the god and goddess. But let's take Hemingway and Faulkner, two authors that I admire enormously. Their short story, Hemingway's short stories, they're flawless. They're actually flawless. There's one called The Killers. It's constantly in anthologies. It's one of the most tense, radical, brilliant stories I ever read. So is The Snows of Kilimanjaro. And I find, if I'm rereading, and Faulkner the same, some of his short stories like The Bear, I mean, it's a long short story, it's probably 25,000 words. But what the best of them, of those two authors that I've picked out, is somehow funneled into their stories more than their novels. So I love reading short stories, and the short story, I think Frank O'Connor is the person who christened it The Lonely Voice. And, you know, it's a pity that short stories don't sell like novels.
It is.
You know, a good collection of short stories is better than a middling novel.
Absolutely.
There's this, I don't know, it's like a pound of meat as opposed to a pound of sugar. People think there's more stuff in a novel. And I admire many short stories. There was an English, Elizabeth Bowen's short stories are very, very good. And an English short story writer, it's actually out of fashion now, that terrible trope, pitfall, Elizabeth Taylor, another Elizabeth Taylor.
Yes, yes.
So that's a long answer to a roundabout answer.
Actually, it brings it, I mean, you're referring back to Frank O'Connor, because he made a comment that in military terms, writing a novel is like long-range artillery, and a short story is like hand-to-hand combat. And
yes, well, I think they're all hand-to-hand combat in a way.
And do you feel that, because you've been writing short stories for many years, do you feel that with age and experience it's become any easier or more difficult to write a short story?
Everything becomes more difficult.
Really?
Yes, because you get harder on yourself and more assiduous. Yes, I find because of the anxiety, I don't write with ease. I write with great nervousness, and that has increased because my sensibility has increased. So also, you might write a good story or a good paragraph yesterday. There's no guarantee to what you might do tomorrow. And you know that as a writer. It comes from such a hidden place within the self. There's no tracing of it. There's no knowing what will. And I also find, like, people liked my first book, The Country Girls, very much. People say to me, oh, you know, you should write a book like The Country Girls again. I said, but I couldn't. It wouldn't have its power. The thing has to have its power, and that power comes from the immediate inner person that you are at that time. So what I would write, or did write, in 1960, actually I wrote it in 1958, is not what I would write in 2011. Couldn't bear.
No, that's very interesting.
It would be stale, it wouldn't have that freshness. And it's keeping that freshness, or what, it's not the most appropriate word, but it's keeping that freshness and that as if the words are just coming for the very first time, as hard as you go on and on and on. Of course, the other great short story writer is Joyce.
Yes, I know Joyce and Chekhov have been hugely influential.
Well, Joyce's short stories, I mean, Ulysses is a mountain, but those short stories in Dubliners, to reread, I was rereading some of them the other day. They're so alive. They may be dated in, you know, in certain practical aspects of it, but the inner energy and the chicanery and the elegy in the dead, they're all spot on. Could have been written today. And some of Frank O'Connor's stories I admire very much. He wrote a lot of stories, you see, and he had to, in a way, he wrote, hundreds of stories. And to keep the energy and the power and the surprisingness of them isn't easy. Chekhov, who I'm sure was O'Connor's, it was one of Frank O'Connor. Frank O'Connor had four masters, and I forget the fourth one. Certainly wasn't Joyce. Should have been. It wasn't. The Irish are funny about their own. It was Turgenev, Maupassant, Chekhov, and one other. I was reading it because I had to do a little errand. First night I came with a panel at the university here, talking of Frank O'Connor. And we saw a little interview he did. It was very, very interesting. I'd never heard his voice, I'd never heard him speak, but it was very good.
We've talked about Frank O'Connor, Joyce. I mean, Ireland has such an important literary canon, and I mean, unquestionably, this might make you blush, but you are now a part of that canon. Your work, your novels, and also your short stories.
Are you thinking of the standing ovation?
But you through your accomplishments, you have found yourself a place as part of that canon. And how does that feel to know that you've made an indelible mark upon the Irish literature?
I don't
canon?
actually tell myself that, and that's the truth.
Yeah.
Because I'm always, I sound so boring, but I'm always worried about the next thing I'm writing and the anxiety that is causing me. So therefore I don't look back, I don't bask in, maybe it's my character or maybe it's my nerves. You know, the
Your
great
modesty.
line, my nerves are bad tonight, I fear I am.
Yeah.
Right, I'm glad to have some readers, but, you know, books, serious literature doesn't really sell all that much, as you know. But like last night, there was a great fervour and solidarity.